The first wrong thing that morning was not the snow. It was the empty brass hook by the mudroom door where my truck keys had hung every night for the last 14 months. I stood there in my socks with the coffee smell coming out of the kitchen and the furnace pushing dry heat through the floor vents, looking at that bare hook like it had forgotten its job. Outside, the backyard was white clear to the chain-link fence. The bird feeder bent a little under the weight of it, and the maple behind the garage wearing a hard coat of ice. Inside, the house was warm, and I was suddenly cold. I checked the tray under the mail cubbies, then the shelf above the bench where Daniel dropped his work gloves and the girls left their backpacks. Nothing. My keys had a worn leather fob on them, dark from my thumb over the years, and a little brass tag from Haskins Heating where I'd worked 38 years. They did not just vanish. From the kitchen, Karen called, "Dad, coffee's ready." She called me Dad when she wanted the room smooth. I stepped in, and the ordinary picture was all there. Karen at the stove in gray leggings and one of Daniel's old Buckeye sweatshirts, moving pancakes from griddle to plate. Daniel, in his work jeans, bent over his phone with his reading glasses low on his nose. My older granddaughter, Ellie, 13 and all elbows lately, sitting at the table with her math folder open and not reading a word of it. Her sister Sadie, 9, coloring on the back of a Kroger circular and humming to herself. The kind of winter weekday morning a man ought to be able to walk into without feeling watched. I got my mug from the cabinet by the sink. White ceramic, chipped at the handle. Mine. I had bought 4 of them at a church rummage sale in 1998 when Linda and I still had the ranch house in Galloway and nobody had to ask where I kept my own things. "My keys aren't on the hook," I said. Karen didn't turn around right away. She slid a pancake, flipped another, then said, easy as anything, "You don't need to be driving this morning, Walter. Roads are slick." There are ways a person can tell you something is decided without saying who decided it. She was good at that. I poured coffee and looked at Daniel. That wasn't my question. He lifted his eyes from the phone, then back down. "Karen's right, Dad. It's icy." I waited a beat. "I've driven in Ohio winters longer than either of you have been alive." Ellie glanced up then, just quick, and Sadie's humming stopped. Karen finally turned from the stove with the spatula in her hand and gave me the same smile nurses use before a needle. "Nobody's saying you haven't," she said. "We're just trying to make things easier." That word had been coming around the house more often. Easier. Easier if I let Daniel bring in my prescriptions. Easier if Karen handled the insurance envelope that had come with my name on it. Easier if I stayed in when the weather turned. Easier if I used the downstairs shower, because the upstairs one had a higher step. Easier, 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 till a man could disappear under it. I sat at the end of the table where I always sat, near the window over the side yard. My place had once been clear enough in this family that nobody thought about it. I was Daniel's father, Linda's husband. Grandpa, who fixed the garbage disposal, carried the Christmas boxes down from the garage loft, sharpened pencils with a pocket knife, and knew how to reset the thermostat when the touchscreen froze. After Linda died, and after I slipped on my own front steps that second winter alone, Daniel insisted I move in for a while. 14 months later, I was still in the room over the garage, my life reduced to 2 dresser drawers, 1 closet, and the bench by the mudroom, where my boots used to line up under my keys. Karen set a plate in front of me. 2 pancakes, 1 sausage link, half a banana. She had started doing that too, portioning my breakfast before I sat down. "I'd have made my own," I said. "I know," she said. "That's the point." Daniel gave a tired little exhale into his coffee, the kind a man gives when he thinks 2 women are arguing at the hardware store. "Can we not do this first thing?" There are sentences that land harder because they're not loud. I cut into the pancake. It was still wet in the middle. Sadie looked up at me. "Grandpa, are you still taking me to the school music night?" Before I could answer, Karen said, "We'll see how Grandpa's feeling by then." I turned to Sadie. "I'm feeling fine now." Sadie looked at her mother. It was small. So small you could miss it if you were not the one being missed. But I saw it. A child, asking me a question and then waiting for another person to confirm whether my answer counted. I ate half the sausage and set the fork down. After breakfast, Daniel stood to shrug into his canvas work coat, and Karen moved to the counter where she kept the weekly pill sorter beside the toaster. Mine was already sitting there open, Tuesday morning empty. I stopped beside her. Why is that open? She was unscrewing the cap on the orange bottle of my blood pressure medicine. Because I'm helping. I sort those Sunday nights. She laughed softly, not mean, which somehow made it worse. Walter, you forgot yesterday's evening pill. No, I didn't. You did. I looked at the little plastic square. Empty. Then at the bottle. Lighter than it ought to have been, maybe. Hard to tell in the hand. Daniel was pulling on his boots by the back door. I didn't, I said again, and heard how much I sounded like a boy standing in a hallway insisting he hadn't broken the lamp. Karen shook one tablet into her palm and held it out toward me. Here, take this now and we'll reset for the week tonight. I did not put out my hand. Daniel straightened up and zipped his coat. Dad, just let her help. The girls were still at the table. Ellie had stopped pretending to look at math now. Her pencil was still in her hand, but she was watching the counter the way kids watch a dog they think might bite, not because they believe it will, but because the adults have changed the air around it. I don't need help taking a blood pressure pill, I said. Nobody said you need help, Karen said. The tablet sat in her palm between us like communion for a church I had not agreed to join. I took it because Ellie was watching, and because I would not give Karen the satisfaction of saying I was being difficult in front of the children. I swallowed it dry. Karen smiled once, quick and efficient, then turned back to the bottles. Daniel leaned to kiss the top of Sadie's head. Bus in 10, he said. Then to me, casual as weather. Karen's taking you to your appointment at 11. I looked at him. My appointment? With Dr. Patel, Karen said, still facing the counter. Just to check in on the blood pressure and go over a few things. What things? Nothing dramatic, she said. You've seemed a little off lately. There is a moment when a room tells you it has been holding a conversation without you. I felt it then, not the words themselves, the shape of them. The way Daniel was not surprised by the appointment. The way Karen had her coat already hanging over the chair. The way Ellie looked back down at her paper too fast. I didn't ask for an appointment, I said. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. He had done that since he was 15 and trying not to tell me the whole truth about where he'd been. It's just a check-in, Dad. With my doctor. Yes. And nobody thought to mention it to me till now. Karen clicked the pill box shut. If we told you earlier, you'd have stewed about it. I looked at her. Really looked. The neat blonde hair pulled back. The clean counter. The soft, controlled face. She would have hated my saying this, but she had a talent for putting a man in a corner while making the corner look like a courtesy. I'm standing right here, I said. So act like it, she said, and then smiled again because the words had come out sharper than she intended. Nobody said anything after that. Daniel picked up his thermos. The girls gathered their things. Chairs scraped. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere upstairs, a toilet flushed. It was all so normal it made me feel unsteady. That is one of the crueler things about family trouble. The refrigerator still hums. Somebody still asks where the glue sticks are. The world does not dim its lights for your humiliation. Karen drove the girls to school before taking me to the clinic. I rode in the front seat of her Honda with my coat zipped to the chin, staring at the plow ridges along the curb and the brown snow piled in the Kroger parking lot as we passed. She had the heat too high, and some peppermint thing clipped to the vent that made the whole car smell like a church bathroom at Christmas. She talked the whole way in that brisk voice of hers about roads and coupons, and how Daniel might be late because one of his guys had called off. She did not mention my appointment again. I did not either. I was trying to understand whether I had let the floor tilt under me without noticing, or whether somebody had been tilting it a little at a time. The clinic waiting room had fake ficus trees in square black pots and a television on mute with captions running under a weather map. Karen checked me in at the desk before I reached it. The woman behind the glass looked at the computer, then at me and said, "And how have we been doing with the memory concerns?" I said, "The what?" Karen gave a little laugh beside me, hand touching my sleeve. "Some mild forgetfulness. Nothing major. We just want to stay ahead of it. Stay ahead of it." The receptionist nodded like she had already heard enough to place me in a category. She slid a clipboard toward Karen, not me. I could feel my ears burning. "I can fill that out." "Of course you can," Karen said quickly, and then to the receptionist, "Sometimes he misses a line, so I just like to double-check." The receptionist smiled, the same careful smile Karen used in the kitchen. Not rude. Worse, accommodating. I took the clipboard anyway and filled every line in block letters, neat enough to satisfy a sergeant. Name, date of birth, insurance, medications, emergency contact. When I handed it back, the receptionist glanced at Karen before taking it from me. By the time we got home, it was afternoon, and Daniel's truck was already in the drive. He had come back for some paperwork, he said. Karen was in the laundry room switching loads. I hung my coat, minus keys, and stood by the hall table pretending to look through a stack of school flyers while their voices carried from the kitchen. Daniel said low, "Did Patel say anything?" Karen answered in the same low voice. "But there are some things you hear because the world has gone too quiet around them. He wants to keep an eye on the confusion spells." "He held still." Daniel said, "That's what I figured." Then Karen, softer. "I told them he's been getting turned around, and sometimes he gets defensive when he can't remember." They said that's common. The flyer in my hand blurred. "Construction paper fundraiser. Pepperoni roll sale. $10 a box." I heard Daniel sigh. "We may have to do more than just keep an eye on it." I stood in my son's hallway, under the family photo wall where Linda's last Christmas picture still hung between Ellie's school portrait and a beach picture from Hilton Head, and listened to my own mind being described to strangers in words I had never said. That was the moment I understood this was no longer just Karen being overhelpful. Something had started moving in that house without me, and it had my name on it. Something had started moving in that house without me, and it had my name on it. I stayed in the hallway another few seconds with that school flyer in my hand till I heard Karen open the refrigerator. Then I set the paper back on the table exactly where I had found it, and went upstairs to my room over the garage. I sat on the edge of the bed without taking my coat off. There are moments in a man's life when the room around him goes plain and hard, like all the soft parts have been sanded out of it. I had felt it once in 1978 when a foreman at Haskins told me I was too green for a service truck and stuck me in the sheet metal room another 6 months. I felt it again the morning Linda died in Riverside Methodist, when a nurse said she was sorry and then gave me a styrofoam cup of coffee like that was the next sensible step. You stand there and understand all at once that the world has already changed shape and nobody thinks you need warning. I looked around that room and saw how little of me was in it. 2 flannel shirts hanging crooked in the closet, my shaving kit on the dresser, Linda's framed picture from our 40th anniversary trip to Put-in-Bay, her hand on the ferry rail, hair blowing across her cheek, the little battery radio I listened to ball games on in summer. 14 months in my son's house, and I had somehow made myself grateful for a room that still felt like a place somebody let me use. I had stayed quiet because I knew how old men could sound when they started complaining about being managed. I had seen it happen at the VFW after Linda passed. Men who had once run crews and businesses reduced to telling the same 2 grievances into weak coffee while everyone around them nodded the way people nod at weather. I had promised myself I would never become a man whose last clear voice was wasted on sounding aggrieved. And if I am honest, I stayed quiet because Daniel was my son. A man keeps hoping his own child will notice before the damage becomes official. That afternoon I went downstairs and found my pill bottles in the cabinet over the microwave where Karen kept the vitamins and cold medicine. I counted twice. The blood pressure bottle was short by 2 from where it ought to have been. Maybe 3. Hard to say because she had already reset the week. I stood there with the bottle in my hand and heard Karen's car pull into the drive with the girls. I put everything back the way I found it. At dinner, Karen made meatloaf, canned green beans, and mashed potatoes from a box. Daniel talked about one of his guys calling off and a busted line set at a job in Dublin. Sadie asked if she could get bangs. Ellie said almost nothing. I noticed, when I reached for the salt, that Karen had moved it next to Daniel's plate. Small thing. Smaller than keys, smaller than pill bottles. But I noticed that all the same. When I said I might run out tomorrow and get a new furnace filter for the basement unit, Karen didn't even look up from cutting Sadie's meat. "Daniel can do that Saturday." "I know he can," I said. I said I might. Daniel took a drink of iced tea. "No point you getting out in this. It's a filter, not a cattle drive." Karen gave that tight little smile. "There's no reason to make it a thing, Walter." Across the table, Ellie looked down so fast she almost dropped her fork. "Sadie kept eating because 9-year-olds will keep eating through a tornado if the potatoes are warm," I said. I didn't know speaking in my own sentence counted as making a thing. Nobody answered that. That was the part that began to sour in me, not just what Karen said. The way Silence stepped in behind her and put a stamp on it. Later that night, after they were all upstairs, I went to the mudroom and checked the mail slots. My bank envelope from First Community wasn't there. I knew it should have been. They mailed statements the third business day of the month, and that had been yesterday. I checked the recycling under the counter. Nothing. I checked the pile on the hall table. School papers, a pizza coupon, a church newsletter Karen never read but never threw away. No bank envelope. I slept badly. Around 3, I woke with the old feeling I used to get before service calls in January, when you knew somebody else's house was cold and you'd be the one expected to fix it in the dark. Except now the cold thing was inside the house already. The next morning, when Daniel left for work, I asked him at the back door, plain and direct, "Did you tell that clinic I was having confusion spells?" He froze with one glove half on. Not guilty exactly, caught having already decided I had no right to ask. "I talked to them," he said. "Using those words?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Dad, they ask questions. And you answered them with things I never said." Karen was rinsing berries at the sink. I could feel her listening without turning. Daniel sighed. "You've been off." "Off. You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I'd like to hear you say it." Karen set the berries down and dried her hands. "Walter, nobody is attacking you." I looked at my son. "Did you tell them I get turned around?" He shifted his weight, already tired of it. "Once or twice, yes. One time, 2 winters ago, I missed the turn by the old hardware store because they'd torn down the gas station landmark I'd used for 20 years. It still happened," Karen said. That was the trick of her. She could take a true pebble and build a whole wall out of it. I said to Daniel, "And that's enough for you to start describing me to doctors like I don't know my own mind?" Karen stepped in before he answered. "It is enough to be proactive." I will admit I raised my voice then. Not much. Just enough that Sadie, coming in with one boot unlaced, stopped in the doorway. "Proactive about what?" I said. "Getting me declared what?" Sadie looked from me to her mother. Karen went soft instantly. "Sweetheart, go finish getting ready." The girl went. Daniel looked past me toward the stairs and said under his breath, "See? This is what I mean." That hit me harder than Karen's talking ever did. My own son using my justifiable anger as proof of the condition they were assigning me. I went outside after that, no keys needed, and walked the shoveled strip along the side of the house in my coat and boots till the cold got up behind my knees. From the garage window I could see Linda's old Craftsman wrench set in the cardboard box I had never fully unpacked. She used to laugh at me for keeping every tool nested back in place. "A man ought to know where things belong," she'd say. She never meant sockets and pliers only. By the time I came back in, I knew 2 things. First, Karen had not come up with all this overnight. Second, if I did not start writing things down, I would lose not my memory but my position. Other people would remember me wrong on purpose. That afternoon I bought a spiral notebook from the drugstore when Karen sent me in to pick up cough drops for Sadie while she waited in the car. 79 cents, blue cover. I slipped it inside my coat and started that night. January 8. Keys removed from mudroom hook. Pill organizer altered before breakfast. Karen said, "You don't need to be driving." Daniel backed her. Clinic already primed with memory concerns. Daniel confirmed confusion spells. Blood pressure bottle count off. Writing it made me feel foolish for the first 10 minutes, then less foolish than blind. 3 days later, Ellie knocked on my door after school. She stood there in a navy hoodie with wet snow darkening the shoulders and asked if I had any tape. I gave her the roll from my desk drawer. She stepped in, saw the notebook open beside the lamp, and looked at it quick, then at me. "Mom called again," she said. "Called who?" "The doctor place." She twisted the hoodie string around her finger. "The one from the other day." I kept my voice even. "How do you know that?" I heard her in the laundry room. Ellie looked toward the hall. She said, "He gets upset when he feels challenged." For a second I could not speak, not because I didn't understand, because I understood too well. Ellie's face changed. Kids know when they've handed an adult something heavy. "You don't have to say anything," she said quickly. I managed. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded once and left with the tape. That night I added another line. Karen called clinic again, said I, "Get upset when challenged." I sat with the pen in my hand a long time after that. My father had despised weakness in any form that made noise. If you were sick, you worked through it. If you were hurt, you limped quiet. When I was 12 and cried after splitting my chin on a creek rock, he told me to shut it down before the whole county heard. I had spent 50 years becoming a different kind of man than him, steadier where he was hard, gentler where he was sharp. But one thing he had put in me never quite left, the terror of being seen as less solid than you were. Now here I was, 72 years old, being turned into a softer, weaker creature in my own son's house by people who used sympathy the way other people use rope. The snow came heavier the following Friday. By dusk, the backyard looked level from fence to porch, every footprint gone. Daniel got home late and already worn thin. Karen met him in the kitchen before he'd taken off his coat. I was in the den, lamp on, reading the same page of the paper for 20 minutes. I heard my name, then bank statement, then this cannot keep happening. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. What bank statement? Karen had an envelope in her hand. Open. Mine. Daniel looked tired enough to be dangerous. Dad, why are you moving money around without telling anybody? I stared at him. What money? Karen lifted the statement. $2,000 out of savings on Monday, I said. That would be my account. That's not the point, she snapped. It is exactly the point. Daniel stepped closer. For what? I looked from one to the other and understood in a flash what had happened. The little account at First Community, the one Linda and I had kept for emergencies and never talked much about, had been shifted online after I moved in. Karen had insisted that was easier too. I had gone Monday to the branch with my ID and withdrawn cash to rent a small P.O. box and speak to a lawyer whose name Marlene Foster at the county senior resource desk had quietly given me over the phone that afternoon. I had not told them because I had not yet decided how much danger I was in. My money, I said again, for my reasons. Karen let out a short laugh with no humor in it. Daniel, this is exactly what I've been saying. He's hiding things, getting erratic, making financial decisions. I took money out of my own savings, I said. That is not erratic. Opening my mail is. Daniel's face changed then, and not for the better. Something in him finally chose a side, and he chose the easier one. We are trying to keep this family stable, he said. And all you do is push, I said. By being a grown man? Karen said, by acting like everybody here owes you an explanation while you do whatever you want. I looked at my son. She opened my bank statement. He didn't answer. Outside, the wind hit the side of the house hard enough to rattle the storm door. Sadie was upstairs practicing clarinet, thin, bad notes leaking through the vent. The ordinary life of the house kept going while the bottom dropped out of it. Daniel said low and flat now, maybe this isn't working. I felt something old and stubborn rise up in me. No, I said, it isn't. Karen folded her arms. Then stop making it worse. I looked at the two of them standing there in my son's kitchen, beneath the school calendar and the magnet from Myrtle Beach, and I saw, all at once, that they had already made a version of me they could live with. A burden, a complication, a man to be managed till he could be moved. I said, give me my mail, give me my keys, and don't either of you ever call a doctor again and lie about my mind. Daniel's jaw tightened. You need to calm down. There it was again. Not answer, not truth. Management. I am calm, I said. You just don't like hearing me while I still sound like myself. Karen muttered. Unbelievable. Daniel stepped toward the mudroom and jabbed a finger toward the back door. Then maybe you need some time to think somewhere else. I honestly thought for one foolish second that he did not mean it. Then he opened the door. Snow blew in across the mat. Get out, he said, you useless burden. The words hit the room and stayed there. Karen did not tell him to stop. I looked at my son, waiting for his face to change, waiting for the boy I had taught to drive on Norton Road and help through algebra, and carried half asleep from the couch to bed after fireworks when he was 6. Nothing changed. So I took my coat from the hook, took the notebook from my inside pocket and walked out into the snow. The cold hit hard enough to take my breath on the first step, but anger will keep a man upright longer than warmth sometimes. I made it to the sidewalk before I realized I still had no keys and nowhere close enough to walk that wasn't already closed for the night. Snow blew sideways under the streetlight at the corner, and the houses across the cul-de-sac had that sealed-up winter look to them, porch lights glowing against shut curtains. Everybody inside their own warm lives. I stood there with my coat collar turned up and my notebook in the inside pocket and understood, with a plainness that cut deeper than shock, that my son had not thrown out an argument. He had thrown out me. I walked to the main road because motion was better than standing still. My knees were stiff by the time I reached the speedway at the corner, and the young woman behind the register took one look at me and asked if I needed help. There are moments when pride becomes a childish thing. I told her yes. She called non-emergency, and while we waited, she poured me coffee from the burner in a paper cup that tasted faintly of scorched plastic and old beans. It was the best coffee I had ever had in my life. The patrol officer who arrived was a broad woman in her 40s named Ruiz, not dramatic, not soft either. She asked 3 questions in a row without interrupting me once. My name, where I lived, and whether anyone had put hands on me. I answered. When I told her I had nowhere nearby to go and that there had been earlier problems involving medication, mail, and false reports to a clinic, she stopped writing for a second and looked up. "You have that written down?" she asked. I took out the notebook. 20 minutes later, I was sitting under a county blanket in an observation room attached to an overnight warming clinic run out of the county health building. The room had pale yellow walls, 1 vinyl chair for visitors, a narrow bed, and a window looking onto a parking lot half full of dirty snow and police reflections. Officer Ruiz had called someone, and that someone turned out to be Marlene Foster. She came in carrying a canvas tote and wearing a tan coat with melting snow along the shoulders. I knew her voice before I knew her face. She was the one from the senior resource desk who had given me the elder law attorney's name Monday afternoon after I told her carefully that I wanted to ask a hypothetical question about being described to doctors in ways I had not agreed to. "Mr. Mercer," she said, pulling off her gloves. "I'm sorry it got this far." That sentence did something to me. Not because it was kind, because it was accurate. Got this far, as if there had been a line somewhere behind me, crossed in steps, not all at once. She sat down with my notebook and read without hurrying. Then Officer Ruiz came back with a printout from the clinic and another from dispatch. Between them, they laid the thing out simple enough that even I could see the shape clean. Karen had called Dr. Patel's office twice in the last week, once before my appointment and once after, reporting confusion, agitation, poor medication, compliance, and financial impulsivity. Daniel had spoken to the nurse line too. The wording on the intake form had not come from nowhere. It came from my own house. Ruiz asked whether anyone had access to my medication bottles. I said yes. Marlene asked whether anyone had opened mail addressed to me. I said yes again. Then she asked the one that mattered most. "Mr. Mercer, did you feel tonight that you were being removed because of immediate danger, or because you were objecting to how you were being handled?" I looked at her, at the glasses hanging on the little chain at her neck, at the pen poised above the legal pad, at the room where nobody was smiling at me like I was difficult. "The second one," I said. "I was objecting." She nodded once and wrote that down. By then it was past 10. Snow still tapping the window. Ruiz stepped into the hall, made the call, came back and said, "Your son's coming in." I thought I was ready. I wasn't. Daniel came through the doorway without Karen. His coat was half-zipped and there was snow melting in his hair. For 1 second his face was set in that hard, practical look he'd had in the kitchen, the look of a man burdened by somebody else's trouble. Then he saw me sitting upright at the little table by the bed, glasses on, notebook open, Officer Ruiz standing near the wall, and Marlene Foster beside me with a stack of papers. His face changed so fast it almost looked like pain. "This can't be true," he said. "I can't believe you did this." That word sat between us. This. As if the thing I had done was involve the truth. Nobody in the room moved to smooth it over for him. Marlene spoke first. "Mr. Mercer, your father did not create tonight's record. He preserved it." Daniel looked at her like he had only just noticed someone else was allowed to speak. Officer Ruiz said, "Your father was found outside in dangerous weather after being put out of the home where he resides. We also have corroborating information that concerns were reported about his mental state and finances prior to tonight." Daniel turned to me then. "Dad, I was angry." I said nothing. I didn't know she'd called them that many times. Still nothing. He took 1 step into the room. I thought we were trying to help. There are moments when a man sees the exact place where pity for someone would let them escape what they did. I had spent too much of the last year living in those escapes. No, I said. My voice sounded steady even to me. You were trying not to look too closely. He stared at me. I touched the notebook with one finger. The keys, the pills, the bank statement she opened, the calls to the clinic. The way you started talking to me like I was somebody you had to manage. None of that happened all at once, Daniel. You had plenty to look at. His eyes dropped to the notebook. I went on because I had earned the right to finish a sentence in that room. What hurt me wasn't Karen. Not first. A wife protects her own advantage sometimes, I understand that. What hurt me was my son standing there while I got made smaller in my own life and deciding smaller was easier. He put a hand over his mouth. Just for a second. I had never seen him do that since he was a boy trying not to cry in a dentist's chair. Marlene slid one of the papers toward him. Your father's written notes match the clinic contact log and the timeline from tonight. This is not a misunderstanding built on one bad argument. Daniel didn't take the paper. I said, at the clinic, they talked around me because somebody had gotten there first with a version of me. In my own house, the girls started looking to their mother before answering me. Do you understand that? You did not just throw me out tonight. You helped throw me away for weeks before you opened that door. He flinched, like I had struck him. Good, a part of me thought. Then I hated that part, because satisfaction had arrived, wearing a mean face. Linda would have hated it too. She used to tell me there were some victories that left grease on the hands. Daniel said, quieter now. I should have listened. Yes, I said. Nothing else. Just that. I let the word stand there and do its own work. Officer Ruiz asked me what I wanted for the night. It was the first time in months anybody in a position of consequence had asked me that before deciding something. I felt that question all the way down to my ribs. I want access to my room, my belongings, my medication, and my mail tomorrow with an officer present, I said. And I want no one from that house speaking to my doctors or my bank for me again. Ruiz nodded. Marlene wrote it down. Daniel just stood there taking it. Then he said the thing I had been waiting for and dreading both. Can you come home tonight? No we. No Karen wants. Just him finally stripped down to himself. I looked at him a long time. No, I said. That was the real reversal, I think. Not the papers, not the officer, not even the shame on his face. It was that the answer belonged to me. The rest moved the way necessary things move. The next morning, Officer Ruiz met me at the house. Karen did not look at me when I came in for my things. Daniel did, repeatedly, like a man discovering the furniture had been rearranged inside his own head. Ellie stood halfway up the stairs, pale and quiet. When I passed her with my duffel bag, she said, "Bye, Grandpa," in a voice that made it clear she knew a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed by weekend apologies. I moved into a modest one-bedroom over on the west side 2 weeks later. Not much to it. Brown carpet, radiator heat, parking lot view. But the mailbox downstairs had my name on it, and nobody touched my pills but me. There were consequences after that. Karen had to answer for the clinic calls and the financial interference. Daniel called more than once. At first to explain, then to apologize, then finally just to ask how I was. I answered some of those calls and not others. There is a difference between punishment and proportion. I was too old to confuse them. One Saturday in late February, I went down to the county building to sign the last of the papers, changing my mailing address and updating my medical contacts. Winter was loosening by then, not gone, but loosening. The snowbanks along the curb had grayed at the edges, and water dripped steady from the gutter above the entrance in a rhythm that sounded almost like patience. I came back out with a paper cup of coffee from the vending counter in the lobby and sat on the bench near the side wall where the sun reached for an hour in the afternoon. The coffee had already gone lukewarm. People came and went with folders, scarves, grocery bags, ordinary faces carrying ordinary trouble. Nobody in that place knew I had once been reduced to a burden in my own son's kitchen. Nobody there was waiting to see whether my account of myself matched someone else's. I sat with my coat open a little at the throat and watched the thaw water tick from the roof onto the concrete. Linda's picture was in my wallet, same as always. I touched the edge of it through the leather once, then let my hand rest. The air was still cold, but it no longer felt like judgment. For the first time in a long while, I was sitting somewhere as myself, not as somebody's managed version of me. And when I looked down at the envelope in my lap with my full name typed clean across the front, it felt, plain and solid, like it belonged to the right man again.